In this session, I want to look at five shocking verses from, as usual, both Old and New Testament, showing a decided negative view towards women, probably especially girls, or sometimes I call them women children. They have many names. But let's start with the first book in the Bible, obviously. We like to start with Genesis when we can. Need to move something out of my way here. Okay. Genesis 19, 6 through 8. If you've seen other videos on this channel, you may have already seen us cover this. There are many reasons we could cover it, but this is a pretty clear example of misogyny. I don't know why it's in the Bible. But Lot went out to them at the doorway, who apparently all of the men in Sodom, they always call it Sodom and Gomorrah, but Lot has these angelic guests and they want to have their way with him. All the men in town. I guess this shows how wicked the town is, or the towns. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have two daughters who have not had relations with man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men, inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof." So hospitality is more important than protecting your daughters from gang rape, and not only failing to protect, but this was Lot's idea. They didn't come there looking for girls. They wanted to have their way with the two guests. Don't know how you spin that into a story that belongs in the good book, whether you're talking about modern evangelical approaches or the original text, which I guess was passed through an oral tradition for centuries, maybe during the Babylonian exile. That's really not relevant. It's just shocking. And somehow you'll hear, I remember back in the day, well, before my time even, I've seen footage of a young Billy Graham going through parts of, I think it's New York City, and saying, well, it's just like Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no moral truth to be taught or learned from Sodom and Gomorrah. The towns, why do they have to be destroyed? How is this something you want your kids to read or memorize? I don't know, but it's obviously misogynistic. I'm a former teacher here, people. I need a certain color for my pen. Come on. Yeah, red. All right. Genesis, first five books are in order: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and they all have plenty of shocking material. Now, when people want to put the Ten Commandments on a courthouse or in a courthouse or on any wall, it's deceptive right there. There are not 10 commandments. There are several chapters that give all kinds of commandments. And you'll find them in Exodus. And it's, 3 or 4 pages worth of commands. And this is how you have to do this. Some of it's highly specific, and you wouldn't think that would be such a big deal. But even if you look at the Ten Commandments on some monument or display, you notice that most of them have nothing to do with morality. It's just, thou shalt have no gods before me. Don't make any image of anything, or remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. How is this morality? And also, when they're trying to deliver the so-called Ten Commandments, notice how women are grouped into this. As always, I like to read the King James Version for various reasons. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. What? Yeah, the wife is a thing. It's as clear as day. You know, you want you King James version only or KGV only. You want to put the so-called Ten Commandments in the courthouse somewhere. Okay, why is that? Because in your high control religion culture, your views may not be as far from this or from Lot's offer, but then again, they are. Remember the first novel written by John Grisham only sold 10,000 copies, just enough, you know. But it became a movie it blew up, and then it probably sold a ton. Also because The Firm blew up as a movie and was I think the next book. Most people think of The Firm as the first one, but the plot device for A Time to Kill it was actually really good because it gets the audience or the reader discussing. And a lot of people, I would think, from the deep South, where you're going to find a lot of, you know, evangelical Christianity, high control, don't question anything, everything in the Bible is true. Uh, they're also, they tend to, I think, this was set in the South. Well, that's where Grisham's from, Mississippi. But the father, who I guess was played by Samuel L. Jackson, God, this is many years ago, he sees the accused who had maybe killed or certainly molested his daughter, I think it was, or his kid. Yeah, daughter, they're going to use that. And he murders them in the courthouse before they've even had a trial. And so many of these people who would read this or listen to a sermon about how good this is would definitely were on the side of the father. Like, that's exactly what I would do. It's like, really? You couldn't wait for a trial to make sure you're shooting the right folk? You know, but Lot does not share the same values as modern men. I've heard many men say that if anybody ever touched it seems to be the daughter. What about the son? But if they ever touch my daughter, you'd never find them. And here's a lot. Well, I don't want you messing with my guests, but I do have daughters who are virgins. If you want to gang rape them, I'll bring them right out. And they I think this is when the men out there are temporarily blinded. They're not able to do anything. And then Lot and his wife and the daughters get the heck out of there. And then the cities are destroyed. It's such old mythological storytelling where gods and any characters end up doing a lot of terrible things. But I can't think of anything worse than what Lot's doing right here and how his wife ends up as a pillar of salt and he gets out. I don't know. Yeah, whether it's the house, the ass, or the wife. I won't make an easy joke there, but it's anything that is thy neighbor's. Okay. So people say, well, we don't want gay marriage. We want a biblical marriage. I don't think you really do. I know the women don't. Right. I can't speak for them, but I don't think they do. All right. Deuteronomy. This is only Yeah, we only need two verses. This one also shows up in another video because they're so shocking and often for several reasons. So yeah, Yahweh is giving commandments not just in Exodus, but he's still doing it here too in Deuteronomy. But if this charge is true, that the girl was not found a virgin, then they shall bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death because she has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot in her father's house. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. Wow, that's Sharia law. And what if this is if the man finds that on his wedding night his bride is not a virgin? Does Deuteronomy 22 and 23 then say, and if a man has lied and he is not a virgin? There's nothing like that. Why? Because of what we just saw. Property. And think about it. How could you prove whether a male is a virgin or not? You have to take his word. I wouldn't trust that. But anytime The Old Testament is talking about, but the girls who have not yet lain with a man, or in this case, they check. Wow. Where would you get your morality without the Bible? So she wasn't a virgin. And that doesn't mean this one also. No wonder folks on the extreme right don't often think about an exception for rape or incest. If you're just doing the test, it could be for those reasons. And in this culture, I would think it's not surprising. Wow. So stone her if she's not a virgin, but there's no counterpoint for if the male has lied. And of course, people would have laughed back then. Well, the male, what does that matter? All right. Maybe as these first five books progress in order of their presentation, they get nicer. Maybe Moses is a good fella. He seemed nice. Charlton Heston was certainly a handsome man back there in the 50s, and well into other decades too. And Moses said unto them, have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Yeah, that was a long time ago, Moses. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. The test. Get in line. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Oh, sometimes they don't even have to come out and say it. No, and apologists think that they have room. Well, that doesn't mean that they were going to do anything nasty to them. Keep alive for yourselves. If they took away the for yourselves, then the apologist has plenty of room. I mean, the apologist always finds something to twist, but these are so obvious in what is going on. Yeah, Moses is upset that all these women are still alive. Now, you could also say he did say, kill every male among the little ones. Yes, he did. But have you saved all the women alive? So I guess they have to get in lines and they have to be tested. Oh, virgin, not a virgin. Maybe they just approximate, you know. I don't know what they did. They didn't find it necessary to keep writing about that. Now, again, there are better reasons to show that Moses did not write any of the five books. It's probably a mythological character, but I don't think he would have written this either, right? Or if he did, he's proud of it. Yeah, I told him, keep alive for yourselves. One. All right, well, again, first five books of the Old Testament, long time ago, not as long as the books would like you to think, but a long time ago. Certainly a different culture. Animal sacrifice, you know, women treated as property. Let's move into the New Testament. There are four canonical gospels. Most people say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you start doing of any sort of a dive into biblical criticism, you'll start saying Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, because that's the order they were clearly written. But almost the entirety of the New Testament after that is written by Paul, who may have been of Tarsus, but we don't know much about Paul. There are 13 letters attributed to him. Seven are considered to be written by Paul, and six are written by other people who are using the name of Paul. So, man, there's a good thing going. This will probably circulate well. And one of them is Timothy. So I think it's First, Second Timothy, Titus, but there are at least six that are disputed. Either way, none of that talk matters when you're talking about evangelical approaches to the text. It's all God's word, it's all perfect. And they would have shouted you down long before you get to tell them that some of these letters may not have been written by Paul. or that I get to call him some guy named Paul, or that he may have been of Tarsus. But okay, so Timothy is valid. I'll go with that. This is the first letter to Timothy from Paul. First verse, or first chapter, verses 8 through 15. So this is Paul speaking through the pen. I will, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing, if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. Ouch. That seems almost worse because it's much more modernized. So Paul is considered to be a philosopher. That's got to be the worst defense I've ever seen. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. So that means she's lesser? And Adam was not deceived. Oh, I guess he's trying to say that only Eve, after having a conversation with a very crafty serpent, she was deceived by the serpent. And then I guess she just said, "Hey, you want some?" But even if we're given all that, why didn't Adam say, "Hey, this didn't come from that one tree where God said, mm-mm." Paul, that's so lame. And this probably isn't Paul, but somebody pretending to be. I think other of the seven letters that are not disputed, Paul is much more positive towards women. But if you want to say everything is exactly as it was presented to me when I first read my Bible, and they never think of the most basic things. Every thing called Timothy or Thessalonians or Mark was a separate text that traveled all by itself for a long time. It was so long before anybody said, "Wait, we should put all of these together and call it the Bible, Christian Bible." Oh, okay. But Mark traveled maybe for decades before Matthew decided to write his version, and he also used Mark to write his version. None of those were eyewitnesses, none of those writers. Luke makes it plain. After the eyewitnesses had given their accounts, I thought I should do it, O most excellent Theophilus. So he's making it sound like an epistle too, as Paul would. And Theophilus, oh, God, love, God lover, loved by God. The names used tend to have some meaning like that. I think Joseph of Arimathea means something like good and faithful, maybe. Adam. Anyway, I'm not going to start becoming a biblical scholar here, but almost every name that you see has some deeper uh, meaning that a scholar can dive into. But all we're looking at here is this is where so many Christian denominations spring up, right? Well, our church has a female pastor. Whoa, you must be a mainline minister. And what was it? Rick Warren was that Saddleback? He was all the rage not that long ago. But what they do, I think it may have been as minor as letting women preach. I don't think they went as far as to perform ceremonies for homosexual unions. But whatever violation of something like this they did, the Southern Baptist Convention kicked them out. What is that? Excommunicated them. And of course, that's just I'm just mentioning it because he was famous. But oh yeah, this is where churches split off. And they have such strict dogma. I I guess I could say it's kind of ironic that they would base dogma from a letter that was not actually written by Paul. I think it's just as weird if the letter was written by Paul. Who cares? Paul is a lousy philosopher. Because Adam was first formed, men have precedence forever. Yeah, right. And now you're even trying to say that Adam was not deceived. He was told right along with Eve, there's a tree in this garden, the fruit you shall not eat. Even if you're trying to say that she handed him the fruit and she knew where it had come from, he should have asked. He's the man after all, right? We're not going to let a woman teach or usurp authority over the man. Well, if he has authority, he should be smart enough to say, "Hey, this didn't come from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil." We'll often call it the tree. What is it? The tree of good and evil. No, it's and if you dig into this, you see God. It's not. We're not even looking at monotheism. They're afraid they are gods and they talk to each other. And then the man and the woman, will become like us if they eat from that fruit. The serpent tells her, no, that's not true. And then some people say that was Satan. Nope. Nothing in the story suggests it was Satan. Just a phallic symbol uh, convincing the woman, yeah, go ahead. This Bible, I tell you what. So let's review again. I taught online for so many years. I'd like to do this. This is the approach of C.J. Chris Hornthwaite. He's an excellent biblical scholar. He's so good you can't tell what he believes unless he comes out and tells you. He's not an apologist. Boy, no, he's not. But he is a believer. What? You can't be a believer unless you do it our way. You let women preach. So, yeah, the whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing is just a farce. To to be a Bible thumper and to keep talking about this as if you want kids in school, it's depravity. Later in that book, the two girls, they're not girls anymore. They're older, and there are no men around. And so, one by one, on successive nights, they make their father drink wine. Not sure how that happens. And the writer says, one by one, they lay with him, past tense, or they go in and lie with him, but Lot perceiveth it not. Right. He has an erection and an ejaculation, and he doesn't perceive it. Both nights. It's just depravity. It's really only depravity if you want to say this is a good book and we want the kids to hear about all of it in vacation Bible school and Sunday school. If you read it the way it was intended, mythology, yeah, gods and characters and mythology are deceptive. They rape people. They they kill people for reasons that aren't fair. I don't know why we can't. Well, I do know why. We can't use the word mythology because then they're afraid that's going to weaken the Old Testament. And then they're not going to be able to link what they call prophecies to the Gospels. And then, oh boy. Or even if Adam and Eve, it's so hard to imagine. They're actually thinking these are two human beings on planet Earth, and there was a snake that could talk. Well, back then, who knows? Okay, it's so obviously mythology, but they're afraid to go there because if any one part of the Bible isn't to be taken literally, then maybe they lose the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's as simple as that. But you're going to hang on to this. At least the mainline churches know to leave a lot of that material from the first five books alone and preach passages from Gospels, not so much the harsh preachings of Paul, whoever he was. That's as clear as can be. And it's also weird. Why would the Ten Commandments have thought crime in there? And how would America work if we didn't covet? You ever seen Mad Men? It's all about getting people to covet. Don't you want a Cadillac? Don't you deserve a Lincoln? I think I do. This is just bizarre, barbaric. Unfortunately, this kind of thing is still happening in certain countries today. Not even going to hint at what I'm talking about there because I don't need to. Keep them for yourselves. You save the women, obviously kill all them. The ones who are still virgin, yep, they're going to be your sex slaves. Still, somehow this one bothers me the most because I know of all the denominations that we don't allow women to teach. Well, the mainline do. The last church where I was participating in, in various ways, the first, did we call him pastor? Reverend? I don't remember. But he was slowly declining in health. So for a long while, he would write the sermons, almost like Paul, and then I would go to the lectern and read them. And the older people really enjoyed it because his disease had impeded his ability to speak. And as you can tell, I, even now 20 years later, can still speak clearly if I want to. That was interesting. I would read his sermons for a while, but obviously that's not going to last long. And then the next minister was female. And no one thought twice about that. But that's mainline Methodist, or that in that case, it was mainline Lutheran, the ELCA branch. Ironically, evangelical, they're not the evangelical branch. The evangelical branch is the Missouri Synod or Synod. And I went to a service there once, and it sounds exactly like Southern Baptist. So if you're as old as I am or older, you may remember Garrison Keeler. When he's making fun of Lutheran, it's ELCA, the main line. Mainline often has to do with family tradition and community tradition, and we don't take it literally. And we're not going to have a kid get up and read any of the verses before this one that we looked at. You know, that's why it was so shocking as an adult to find out what is really going on in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Like offering your daughters, and then the incest in a later chapter. But they still want to pretend that Lot wouldn't perceive his daughters coming in, uh, neither when she lay down or when she arose. Right, but she got his seed. You tend to remember that, people. And what is this idea they made him drink wine? How could his two daughters make him drink wine? Well, they didn't. It's mythology. Mythology doesn't bother explaining things in a way that makes sense. Icarus and his dad are already in a labyrinth at the where the Minotaur resides. If you bought all that premise, you can't then say, "Hey, wait a minute, how could they possibly fashion wings? And where would that wax come from?" And actually, the higher that Icarus flies, the colder it gets. No, that's not how this stuff works. Somebody being turned into a pillar of salt, and even before that story begins to pick up, I think it's Abraham is bargaining with Yahweh. So, Yahweh saying, "I have." He doesn't know how many righteous people are in Sodom and Gomorrah, and so it becomes this sort of poetic thing. Well, if there are this many righteous men, will you not spare Sodom and Gomorrah? It's all mythology, not just the Old Testament, but the Gospels as well. The letters of Paul, okay, maybe they were all written by Paul. They probably weren't. But whether they're the seven undisputed or the six disputed letters, why would we take the preachments of some writer from 2,000 years ago and try to rigidly apply it so that women, not only should they not preach, but I bet in a lot of denominations, they don't even get up and read the Bible or anything, which is so weird because in my mainline Methodist church, women ran the show. I mean, there was a Reverend Rockwood, but after that, choir director was also the organist. And any time we were doing Christmas caroling, which was a nice thing because mainline Methodist churches are going to do at least one good thing a year. So the members who could no longer get out, we would get on a bus and go sing Christmas carols. Dang, I'm getting a little goosebumpy. And then we come back because a group of older, they were called Philathians. I'm not sure why, but they were all women, and they would have sandwiches and hot cocoa for us. And if the women weren't running the show, that whole church would have just collapsed. Well, almost every Sunday school teacher was a female. That's that's not something I even thought about until just now. But yeah, if you're an evangelical, well, we have to follow every word in this Bible. Do you? Let's see. You don't covet. You don't like to buy a new F-150. You're okay with offering daughters, or are you so protective that you would blast somebody if you thought they were being inappropriate? Man, that's Sharia law in the Old Testament. That's just sick. And this is not an isolated incident. If you're reading any of the stories with Moses, there are so many people that are killed. And then sometimes they even have to kill all the animals and all the infants and anything that breathes. It, I'm hoping it, really hoping it's all mythology. It sure reads that way. But yeah, following these preachings, you only have to do that if you take this hard line evangelical approach. If the words are in the Bible, they are true. The stories happen just like that. Jesus walked on water. Many people saw him arise. The tomb was empty, and therefore we can conclude there was a resurrection, or that they were at the wrong tomb. You know, I used to run through these huge cemeteries in Forest Park. I couldn't find the same tomb twice. You know, especially if they had no name on it. It's just, I don't know. Faith because of Paul, what they call the Pauline, authentic Pauline letters. You know, he wants to reach to the Gentiles. He wants them to know you don't have to do any of the things that Jewish people do, starting with circumcision. And so we're saved through grace by faith and not by works. He probably means not by works or rituals under Jewish law. But evangelicals say, oh, it's a one time experience. I become a Christian and I'm saved forever. Well, another one of these letters, James, I think that's a disputed letter too. He says, for it is not by faith alone that we are saved, but by works also. I think he means by doing good works. And that's where you get the mainline approach. Anyway, we could have found many more verses, but it is shocking how women are treated in both Old Testament and New Testament writings.